Hi, good evening. We still have a few people checking in, so please give us a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Hello, good evening to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here with you all and with my colleagues from the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute. So thank you very much for coming to this great evening tonight. What can I say about this? It's obviously an honor for me to welcome you all to Instituto Cervantes. Remember that Cervantes is the Spanish government institution that was created in 1992 for the promotion and of the Spanish language and the culture of Spanish-speaking countries, which is something that Queen Sofia Spanish Institute does very well too. So congratulations to all of you again. And this is an interesting evening because we're doing something that we both do, and that's something that is very pleasurable to me. I mean, the promotion of the Spanish language and the cultures of Spanish-speaking countries is not an easy task, I'm telling you. I know that straight from the horse's mouth and in the flesh, to be honest. Good thing, very rewarding, but a lot of work. A lot of countries that speak Spanish and that produce different things, and we need to unite, and we need to create together and present one another together. So what do we know about tonight's evening? It's the 2022nd or the 2022nd Queen Sofia Spanish Institute award ceremony, which comes from a short list of a few novels, which I think you can see sprinkled on the board in front of you. And tonight, I believe we're going to unravel the mystery who the winner is. I'm not sure if that's the case, but yes, we're all agag waiting for that. So sorry. So some of you will probably know that this used to be a triennial event, and now it's become an annual event. And some others will probably know that it honors basically all these the translations written into English from original Spanish texts from the Spanish-speaking world. But not all of you will probably know that the word translation comes from the mid-14th century word translationem, or translationem, that's the Latin word from the 12th century, but the French translatio, and it means two different things. I'm going to let you in that little secret. The first one is the removal of a saint's body or relics to a new place. How about that? And the second meaning is the rendering of a text from one language to another. And that is what we are applauding today. So congratulations, Queen Sofia Spanish Institute, on your great work and tonight's evening of pleasure. I'm digressing, so just give yourself a whole great applause for being here, and welcome to Instituto Cervantes. Begoña, brilliant.
And that's a hard act to follow with a perfect accent. Thank you very much, Richard, for your kind words, for your support. Thank you for Instituto Cervantes for hosting us tonight. My name is Begoña Santos, and I am the Executive Director of the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute. And for those of you not fully familiar with us, the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute is a New York-based nonprofit corporation founded in the year 1954 by a group of American Hispanophiles passionate about Spain and the Spanish-speaking world, who sought to stimulate American interest in the art, the culture, the customs, the language, the literature, the history of Spain and the Spanish-speaking world. The Institute today keeps this vision current by striving to share the contributions of the Spanish speakers to the history and to the culture of the United States, to make that known, and by showcasing the excellence of the Spanish-speaking world in numerous fields so that lasting ties of friendship may be formed, mutual understanding promoted, and bonds of peace strengthened, all of that. So the Translation Prize was created with the goal of elevating awareness and engendering appreciation of Spanish language literature in the United States with an award of $10,000. As Richard very well said, it used to be a triennial prize, and it is now awarded yearly. Prizes in the past have also taken a deeper look into genre, with a year focused on poetry and into the background of the original author, such as last year when we focused on works originally written by Mexican women authors. Today's prize has expanded its reach to now showcase the translations of Spanish text into English from the entire Spanish-speaking world. So the prize history, and just a little to share with you, dates back over a decade to the year 2010, when the reading committee of the inaugural Translation Prize unanimously recommended Edith Grossman to receive the prize for her extraordinary translation of Antonio Muñoz Molina's A Manuscript of Ashes. Past honorees include Sophie Hughes, Andrea Rosenberg, Dr. Philip W. Silver, Dr. Alan Young, and Margaret Joel Costa. So we at the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute truly hope that these awards and these incredibly talented awardees can serve as an impetus and as an inspiration for future generations of translators to continue to hone their craft, to test the limits of their artistry, and to create translations that will bring the voices and stories of Spanish speakers to new audiences. So according to award-winning translator Katrine Auger Jens, translating, and I quote, is rewriting a literary work. You write the same book but in a different language, which means the book is not the same book anymore. It is a sibling, it is not a twin. The great German writer Günter Grass' view on the art of translating seems to differ from Mrs. Jens's, or maybe not, when he said translation is that which transforms everything so that nothing changes. And of course, one can always count on the genius of Jorge Luis Borges when he affirmed with some sardonic insight that the original is unfaithful to the translation. We're here tonight to celebrate, in the words of yet another translator, Anna Rusconi, that words travel worlds, translators do the driving. Let's honor tonight those who make it possible that we can all enjoy the fascinating world of Spanish language literature. Let's honor the writers, for writers they are, who not only display an astonishing knowledge of the Spanish language, but who offer us, as a present, their nuanced and gloriously skillful command of the English language in truly exquisite words of translation, as, according to Ned Rorem, the art of translation lies less in knowing the language than in knowing your own. So I'd like to thank the publishers and translators from the shortlist who are joining us here tonight, the Reading Committee for their tireless work and shrewd judgment, and our Cultural Committee member, Carmen Posadas, for her expertise in all things literary. She will address us now from Spain, so let's hear a few words from her. Thank you very much.
My name is Carmen Posadas, and I am a member of the Cultural Committee of the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute, and also very proud of being involved with this translation prize. Every year, in order to choose the best translation into English of a work in Spanish, we have a reading committee that consists of 3 scholars with expertise in Spanish and Latin American literature. These are the names of our 3 scholars that have done an absolutely incredible job choosing the very best works. We have Sophie Hughes. She's a British translator of Spanish language writers such as Alia Trabuco, Fernanda Melchor, Brenda Navarro, José Revueltas, and Enrique Vilamatas. She is the recipient of grants from Penn Haim in the USA and the Art Schools Council and Art Foundation in UK. Sophie has been nominated 3 times for the International Booker Prize, as well as the Dublin Literature Award, the Valle Inclán Translation Prize, the National Book Award in Translation, the Penn Translation Prize, and the National Translation Award in Prose. She has worked with Stephen Spender Trust, promoting translations in schools, and also teaches and mentors undergraduates and emerging translators. Then we have Heather Cleary. Heather Cleary's translation of prose and poetry have been recognized by the National Book Foundation, the PEN American and the Best Translation Book Award, among others. Her first book, The Translator's Visibility, Scenes from Contemporary Latin American Fiction, explores the challenges that fictional translators pose to the concepts of originality and intellectual property. She has served on the jury of the National Book Award of Translation, the BTBA, and the PEN Translation Award. She is also a founding member of the translation collective called Sevilla and Company, and was a founding editor of the digital bilingual Buenos Aires Review. She holds a PhD in Latin American and Iberian cultures from Columbia University. And finally, we have Isabel C. Gomez. Isabel is currently an associate professor of Latin American and Iberian studies at UMS Boston. She specializes in translation studies, translation theories, Latin American poetics, comparative literatures, Mexican and Brazilian vanguards, and contemporary literatures, in addition to transhistorical Baroque. Isabel's forthcoming book reflects this area of study, and it is titled Cannibal Translations. She has also written extensively about poetry, transcreation, and Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. In addition to her scholarly writing, she translates from Spanish and Portuguese into English. She has received her BA at the University of Chicago and received both her master's and PhD at UCLA.
Thank you, Carmen Posadas, for that lovely introduction. But thank you most of all to the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute, Instituto Cervantes, staff and leadership for turning attention to translation. My name is Isabel Gomez. It's been my honor to be the chair of this year's reading committee for the QSSI Translation Prize. It's so important to talk about why translation matters, why translation from Spanish matters in this country where Spanish is one of the most widely spoken languages, and yet is not always thought of as a language of high literary production and knowledge creation. I want to have a moment of personal reflection as a Chicana growing up in California with very low fluency of Spanish, as many heritage speakers in this country are. It was through reading works in translation that I gained the spark of wanting to learn the Spanish language. So today we celebrate how translators create cultural connections and also allow for voices from other countries to be heard more broadly. As the chair of the committee this year and a participant in the committee last year, I do have to say that the task of aesthetically and intellectually judging translations is a fraught and subjective one. You have here 6 shortlisted books, which my committee member, Sophie Hughes, will outline more thoroughly, and they all merit great attention and a prize in and of themselves. We actually began with nearly 50 books in our long list. They were all published in 2021, submitted by their publishers or translators, and we examined both the Spanish language alongside the English translation, which not every translation prize chooses to do. For us, this is an important way of understanding what is the artfulness that the translator is bringing to their task in comparison with what is the kind of work that the author has given them with. Because this year, instead of doing a thematic prize, as in years past, we were faced with around 50 works of literary prose that were drawn from a wide range of genres and styles and even time periods. We had literary memoir from Nora Borges, a kind of avant-garde writer from Argentina. We had writers who were more in the young adult fiction zone, kind of attracting younger readers. There was even a work of erotica mixed in the mix, which I think we all took some interest and pleasure in reading. We also had the chance to evaluate different genres such as detective fiction, speculative fiction, Some of the shortlisted candidates are in the kind of prose poetry realm, as well as in kind of thriller genres. And so our task became, how can we think about what work translators have done to reshape these really diverse and creative works from Spanish into a literary readable English that excites us as readers. So we worked independently, and you would be surprised that three actually very different readers with different scholarly backgrounds had a lot of overlap in who we selected for the shortlist. That conversation was exciting because we got to highlight, as my colleague Sophie Hughes will kind of summarize for you, why these were the best of the bunch. But we actually really agreed. And then when it came to choosing our winner, who I will have the honor of announcing later, that was a much more challenging job based on a kind of more full evaluation of the larger challenge of translating the extension of the work. I also want to acknowledge my colleague Heather Cleary. She sends her regrets. She has COVID and so sadly could not be here today. And I will now take the moment to introduce the video by Sophie Hughes, who will present each of the 6 shortlisted translations, and also was the winner of last year's translation prize for her translation of Fernando Melchor's Hurricane Season. So a round of applause for Sophie Hughes and all 6 of the translations.
Well, good evening, everyone. I hope that you're having a terrific night there in New York. We are, of course, all here to celebrate the 2022 Queen Sofia Spanish Institute Translation Prize. I'm Sophie Hughes. I'm a literary translator, and I was lucky enough this year to be 1/3 of the jury for the Translation Prize, with Heather Cleary, who I know is there, and Isabel Gomez, also there, the chair of this year's judges. The late, great Spanish writer and translator Javier Marías wrote that the translator is a privileged writer who has the opportunity to rewrite masterpieces in their own language. As the translator of Sterne's Tristram Shandy into Spanish, Marías knew better than anyone that in order to rewrite masterpieces, one must be a master in his or her own right. Translators are, as others have said before, the shadow heroes of literature. It is with enormous pleasure and pride then that today we draw these translators out of the shadows and celebrate their vital role in the literary ecosystem. In times like these, I hasten to add, we would have wished to give all of the skilled, dedicated, shortlisted translators a prize. Relatedly, I'd like to publicly thank and recognise the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute and the warm, hard-working team there for organising, promoting and increasing the impact of this prize by making the very meaningful and generous decision to award it annually going forward. Without further ado, here are the judges' comments on the 2022 Queen Sofia Spanish Institute Translation Prize shortlist. The Divorce by César Aida, translated by Chris Andrews, published by New Directions. Most of The Divorce takes place in a cafe over the space of just one afternoon, but Aida takes us on an expansive imaginative journey far beyond the confines of this setup. Aida is a master yarn spinner, surprising, satisfying and challenging the reader in equal measure. And we have translator Chris Andrews to thank for the aesthetic journey. He writes Aida's sprawling sentences in extraordinarily elegant and well-controlled English. Jaguar's Tomb by Angelica Gorodisha, translated by Amalia Gladhart, published by Vanderbilt University Press. Jaguar's Tomb is a novel in 3 linked parts, each hinged together by the themes of disappearance and abduction. Grief, longing, becoming, sexual passion and writing are just some of the human conflicts and conditions on which Gorodisha focuses her penetrating gaze as she speaks to Argentina's military dictatorship. Translator Amalia Gladheart lends her ear and ventriloquy to a set of diverse but connected voices, and her versatility is evident on every page. Slash and Burn by Claudia Hernandez, translated by Julia Sanchez, published by And Other Stories. Claudia Hernandez's deeply moving novel depicts the civil war in El Salvador and its aftermath from the inside, that is, from the perspective of a young female ex-combatant. With compelling clarity and deceptive simplicity, the translation by Julia Sanchez stages the everyday obstacles young women face when trying to build a life against the backdrop of multi-generational traumas of war. Eleanor Knows by Claudia Pinheiro, translated by Francis Riddle and published by Charco Press. In the wake of her daughter's mysterious death, Elena struggles with advanced Parkinson's as she desperately searches for information about the case. Pinheiro's novel shines for the complexity of Elena's relationship with the daughter who was also her primary caregiver, and for the breathtaking descriptions of Elena's physicality and inner world. Translator Francis Riddle conveys our protagonist's urgency and frustration with tremendous skill. The North Face of the Heart by Dolores Redondo, translated by Michael Meeks, published by Amazon Crossing. The North Face of the Heart follows Detective Amaya Salazar as she travels from her Basque hometown to southern Louisiana to work on her first case. The novel blends detective fiction with precise attention to regional speech and the embodied experiences of climate change. Translator Michael Meeks brings his experience to the rich dialogue of this spellbinding noir thriller, crafting distinct voices for its roster of transnational and local characters. Biobu by Ida Vitale, translated by Sean Manning, published by Charco Press. Biobu is a delightful series of whimsical, elliptical, clever vignettes about the everyman known as Biobu. They veer frequently into philosophical terrain. From a list of things that irritate her protagonist to a constellation of not quite aphorisms gathered under the title Original Thoughts, Ida Vitale has created and crafted a remarkable array of little jewels which sparkle in Sean Manning's supple, endlessly creative translation.
Thank you, Sophie, and a round of applause for all of the 6 shortlisted works. It's now my honor, thank you, Begonia, to announce that our winner for the 2022 Queen Sofia Spanish Institute Translation Prize is Amalia Gladheart for her translation Jaguar's Tomb by Angelica Gorodischer. Congratulations, Amalia, and please join us.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
One more. Thank you. So, we will now hear a conversation between the chair of our jury committee and our winner tonight. Congratulations again. Thank you.
So, Amalia, congratulations once more. We all enjoyed your work immensely. It impacted us emotionally. It made us think about literature itself. As Sophie Hughes mentioned, this is a work that is very meta-literary. There are 3 parts in which each section has its own author. In fact, Vanderbilt University Press encourage you to look at the copies available for purchase to see this detail. Created a unique title page, kind of setting apart each of the distinct sections of this work, authored by different heteronyms of Angelica Gorodischer. I wanted to ask you if this was a challenge to your translation process, creating different voices for these different narrators, and maintaining that separateness while also blending together with the repetition that she uses.
First, I just want to say thank you, and then I'm going to answer your question. But this is really amazing, and I really appreciate the efforts and judgment of the committee, made up of people whose work I've long admired. So it's especially meaningful that way. I want to acknowledge Angelica Gorodischer, who sadly died earlier this year. Working with her, she was a person of extraordinary generosity and imagination and humor, and it just really has been one of the privileges of my life. And thank you, of course, to Vanderbilt University Press for their enthusiasm and support for the project, and the National Endowment for the Arts, which also supported the translation, and my long-suffering family and friends for all my nerdy kind of weird word questions, and my colleagues and students at the University of Oregon. So I had those kind of nerdy word questions for Angelica. I was able to consult with her as I was working on this translation, and I said, well, so are they really different voices? What were you thinking with these three different? And she said, no, not really. Just a different font, she said. So, and of course, as someone said in the introduction, the translating the one problem that the translator as writer doesn't have is the figuring out what to write about, right? You've got the story there. So, so translating the three different voices, I didn't actually find that different. But what I tried to be really alert to was the repetitions, because they're quite different in terms of the stories they're telling, but there's certain images that recur in certain turns of phrase. And so I wanted to make sure I didn't lose any of those threads.
Excellent. And as you mentioned, the author Angelica Gorodischer passed away. This novel, in many ways, dwells on the lives of women as they're lived and also as they're remembered. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the kind of relationship between translation and a kind of feminist perspective of bringing more attention to older women in the aging process, bringing more attention to women writers.
Yeah, I sort of have focused on translating women's work, because there's so much really interesting work to translate, and because we don't always hear as many of those voices. An interesting thing, I think, in Jaguar's Tomb is the mix of ages of the voices. So the three fictional writers, one man and two women, who produce the three pieces of the book, one is trying to write something different than the traumatic memories that keep intruding for him. And then the next one is quite a young woman who has answered a classified ad because she wants to go off and write, and she goes to a land far, far away. It's sort of a kind of mythical, jungly, not really geographically identified place. And so she's quite at the beginning of her writing. The last voice is a successful writer dying in a hospital bed at the end of a long life, and sort of remembering all her different books and the different things she's written. So there's that kind of, there's a way that there's a beginning, middle, and end, even though the plot jumps. And that voice of, you have the combination in the last voice of sort of taking some pride in the work she's done, and also some regret for things she didn't finish, and then just being the older woman there, sort of at the mercy of the nurse saying, here, sweetie, take the pill that she doesn't want to take, kind of. So there's all parts of what's there.
That was definitely what we found so moving about this work. I wanted to invite you to read a passage. This is something I found compelling as a statement on the act of writing, and sometimes translators end up paying very close attention when they come on the scene, either as translators or writers. So I thought maybe you'd read that for us.
And which passage do you have in mind? You told me, and then you.
I was thinking this one.
Try to get the right one.
On page 84.
Right. Sorry, she had never in her life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is from the middle part of the book. She had never in her life seen a lighthouse, and she imagined it would be a tall tower from which she could see her life and decide, alone and strong, without regret, where and how, in what fashion, to take up the pen, how to twist it over the paper so that the strokes would not all be in the same, but rather the opposite, thick, those that go up and down, delicate, barely visible, those that connect the letters, that connect the words. How, otherwise, to bring to light a different world that shakes her, that through her arm, hand, fingers, pen, the fragrant black ink, causes someone to look up and ask themselves what this ground on which they live is really like? How, otherwise, to find out something of the other, the one who crosses the path, who speaks, the one who betrays, the one who dies? The wind from the west, which brings the rains, sometimes brings as well the scent of cities, the metallic scent of carcasses rotting in corners while men dressed in gray and women tousled by the breeze believe that in all things an unchanging order can be achieved. The howl of the desert dogs, hearing that alone would be enough for them to know, at least to try to know, whether what they carry in their hands and in their pockets is what they have always desired. The desert squeezes throats and puts out fires. The bitter taste of coffee sticks to the palate for hours. Steps on the sand leave ephemeral tracks that are wiped away with the breeze, along with fallen branches and the harsh time that is passing, the infertile time, the time that gives no quarter. She knows it. She can linger in what she has never lived, in what she is willing to cross, in that which can be written and not sung, in the ignorance of the fabulous and the real, in the smooth vertical border of the sheets of poster board, in what she will never now be able to repair, in the thicket of the days and of the hours, in the moment, that moment that is going to arrive. She knows it is going to arrive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before opening it up to questions, I thought I'd perhaps read a little selection you've chosen for your introduction, which is, as a scholar of literary translation, a very valuable tour through the work that you're about to present to readers, but also thinking as someone who reads books that are woven together from other books. This book is citational of Becker, of Emily Dickinson, of Shakespeare, and you allow your readers to see those other writers through your words. But you also give your readers the chance to understand the kind of political context of this work, which is a kind of Argentina that is still suffering through the memory of the Dirty War and the disappearances of many loved ones and family members. And I'm thinking about this passage on page 18, when you talk about a particular translation choice to make sure that English language readers would have access to the context and the important nature of women in the streets demanding to be heard, demanding for their voices to come across. So maybe I'll read the Spanish for our Instituto Cervantes hosts, and you could read the English and think about this political context for us. La novela le sirve como al hombre de los grandes ríos el trabajo, y a mí me sirve la novela de ella y la de él como trabajo que me aísla del mundo en el que suceden cosas inimaginables, fuera de todos los límites en los que se mueve lo que es humano. Y entonces, cuando Gabriela viene y me dice, ¿y vos qué? ¿Vos qué te quedas encerrado llorando? Trabajando, corrijo yo. Llorando, insiste ella. Vos, en vez de venir y hacerte oír con nosotras. Por eso yo le digo que nadie las va a oír, nunca. Y que es mejor hacer lo que yo hago. Hacer algo, transformar lo que es dado en lo que nunca será.
The novel serves her the way work serves the man of the great rivers, and the way her novel and his serve me as work that separates me from the world where unimaginable things happen, things beyond the limits within which all that is human moves. And then when Gabriela comes and says to me, and what about you? You who stay inside crying. Working, I correct. Crying, she insists. You, instead of coming out and making yourself heard with us. So I tell her no one is going to hear those women, ever. And it is better to do what I do, make something, transform what is given into what will never be.
And the important choice to give what in Spanish is a little sabrosa as nosotras, the voice in English as those women, referring to the Madres de Plaza de Mayo and the demands to have the recognition of the disappeared. I think that this work for us as the committee represented such a impressive one because of the silences that it contains and your ability to both render those silences visible but also maintain that complexity in the poetry there.
Thank you. And I did think that nosotras was really, really important because it's really the only explicit, and as you note, it's not that explicit, naming of the Madres de Plaza de Mayo, and specifically of the disappearances and abductions during the Dirty War period. And the whole rest of the novel deals with absences and disappearances. But I thought it was very important that it be clear that it was a group of women that the narrator was declining to join in the march.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to monopolize your time, so are there questions from our public for Amalia? There's a couple here in the middle.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and congratulations. I wonder if you can tell us the process by which you select a work to translate, and then once having selected it, what you do yourself in that process. Do you read do you look at transcripts? Do you look at newsletters or newspapers or clippings, or like what your process is to really delve into the nuances of that historical point?
So I chose this one. I had translated another book of Gorodischer's, Trafalgar, and was interested in doing something else, and just sort of asked her if she had thoughts about which of her many books she wrote, more than 30 all total, she would be interested in seeing translated. This is the fourth to be translated into English. And she suggested Jaguar's Tomb. She liked the puzzle aspect and was kind of intrigued with it. There's a big lag. The book was published in 2005 initially. So that was sort of the selection there. And in terms of research, I had already done, for various other reasons, a certain amount of reading and study of some Argentine history and knowing something about the period and so that was sort of there in the background. And then, as you know, it's a very elusive novel, so there are lots of different paths to go down kind of as I go along. So I don't do all the research and and then start researching, but and then start translating. One of the things I love about translating is the combination of the scholarly and the creative. So you have a good reason to spend all day going down odd little rabbit holes of, you know, who is this poem? So there's some very explicit kind of quotations, you know, let me not to, oh no, I can't remember, love, admitted impediment. There's a whole line of Shakespeare that's sort of right in there. And then there are others that, you know, I had to go find out, read the Somerset Maugham story about Mrs. Forrester and why, you know. And a lot of it then is not really evident in the translation. It's sort of, it's there in the back of your mind so that you know what you're talking about, but they're not things that are necessarily spelled out.
So you've made reference a few times to your interactions with the author. Is that something that you find that is crucial to the work you do? In other words, what would have happened if this author had passed away and you did not have access to the author? Is it a different process when it's in the two sets of circumstances?
It's certainly different. I've translated only living authors. I've had different amounts of communication with the different people I've translated. My experiences have all been very positive. I've heard horror stories in the anecdote land of translators. For it doesn't have to be, right? But the people I've worked with have also varied in their knowledge of English. So Angelica did a fair amount of translating from English to Spanish herself. So we had some fun conversations about word choices, although she was very hands-off in terms of, she didn't say, oh, don't ruin my book, don't do this. But the process would have been usually improvised just because I really enjoyed talking to her, and she was a charming and just fun person, and very open and welcoming. I think translation is always collaborative, even if the author isn't there to look over your shoulder, because there's their voice in the book. But I haven't translated, say, things from the far distant past that there was no possibility of access to that person.
I'll go since I have the microphone. Congratulations. I have two questions in one. Firstly, have you found that different problems arise when you translate between different genres? And secondly, what is the hardest step in any translation process? Not to do with any single genre.
So I have translated all prose fiction in one short play, so I don't, maybe because I'm a proselytizer for translated prose, I think the sound of words and so forth that comes up, this is why poetry is so hard, is also important in literary prose, and there are a lot of echoes and sounds, and so reading it aloud works there too. And what was your second part of the question? What's the
hardest step in the
hardest
translation
step
process?
Gosh, I don't know. But for me, translating is a very kind of gradual sort of layering process. I sort of do a kind of a first draft with lots of holes and optional words with slashes between them and things in parentheses to go back to that I don't have any idea about, and so then I keep kind of going over it again to fill those in before then I really try and read the translation without the Spanish right there in my hand. I think the hardest step is sometimes just letting go. There's some of those little pieces that you worry at for a long time, and finally just saying, well, this is what I'm going to settle on. And sometimes I remain happy with that for a long time, and sometimes you still wake up at 4 a.m. and think, oh.
Just have a quick question. What were some of the most challenging words you had to translate?
I found despaciosamente hard because it's such a nice, slow word for slowly, and slowly is... someone gave me another suggestion that I didn't have at the time, and I can't remember what it was. It was maybe gradually, but I spent a while on despaciosamente. what else? There were some words that Angelica made up, and I didn't, I didn't know that. I feel like in that little bit I read earlier, there was something I thought, oh yeah. But now I can't remember what that was either. There was somewhere about a rampart in here somewhere that was difficult. But there's sometimes sort of odd words, that you don't expect to be hard. Sometimes the little words that sort of stick out. And figuring out what to do with that nosotras, because, it really needed to be us. I mean, there's just no other us. So it's trying to, sometimes it's not the word so much as to make sure I can get the meaning in somewhere else. Sorry, that's not a really, I should have a list to hand.
I was just going to say, you said you've mostly done prose. Is there any genre or any other type of work, whether you would do that or like if you've thought about doing that, like any other category or any kind of challenge that you'd want to take on? Do you have in mind what you would do for a different type of project for translation?
Well, a lot of my scholarship has been on theater, so I would enjoy doing more. I've translated one short play. I would certainly enjoy doing more of that, I think. There you have even more voices to think about, right? Because it has to be playable on stage as well. Every time I keep seeing interesting challenges though in translating prose too, so I can kind of see sticking with that. I wouldn't rule out translating poetry, but it's not something I've done.
Thank you. I just had a follow-on question when you said that there were some things that still keep you awake at 4 o'clock in the morning. Can you give an example of that? I was curious to.
Gosh, I shouldn't have said that because now I can't, nothing strikes me. But there definitely have been things that, and in terms of things in other translations too, they're just sort of, you kind of keep worrying at. But I'm sorry, I don't have a kind of a crystal. Not because I think it's all settled in perfect, but it's not springing to mind.
If there's no further questions, maybe I'll allow myself one last one. As you mentioned, your scholarly work in theater, you're also a translation studies scholar, and this is a kind of perennial question. I think on the prize committee we talked about it as well. The role of a kind of translation theory or kind of meta thinking about how to translate as it relates to the practice of translation. Do you have thoughts on that? Have you found any sort of translation studies concepts useful in your process for this project or other projects, and which ones?
Yeah, to me, translation theory is fascinating because of there is a different level of applicability then, because there's that sort of, rubber meeting the road of having to make a decision about that sentence. And so there's a way that each project sort of requires its own. My approach is to try and, I think as I've translated more, I have felt a greater freedom to sort of do what I think needs to be done, and get a little further from the source text in order to get closer to what I think it's doing. As living in academia as also a translator, I always try and make the argument, sometimes more persuasively than others, that my scholarly reading of the text is there in the translation, right? I mean, all of the things I looked up, all the poems I tried to recognize, everything that I believe I understand about Argentina somehow informs what I'm translating. So I think that is there. And one of my kind of theoretical obsessions is the whole question of translating context, which Edith Grossman has a wonderful quote: "Translators translate context." Right? But figuring out, what is that context? Because then the reception context is completely different, and without context, there's no textual meaning. So thinking about how the book might have landed in its source world, and then how it might be received is sort of the another kind of, I don't know, seesaw. I mix my metaphors here, but it's not so much a translation theory concept as an awareness of, you know, something that I try and keep in mind, and how it might be read that way.
I think you were highly successful in this case with that delicate bridge and balance. So I think perhaps another round of applause for our winner of the translation prize.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Thank you so much, Amalia. This was really, really interesting. Congratulations again. And thank you all for your presence here tonight, for your support. We have, I believe, 3 of our shortlisted translators here tonight, and I think they will be signing their books. The 6 finalists are outside. The books are for sale. And again, thank you very much. Please join us for some wine and tapas upstairs across the courtyard. And thank you again for your support. Congratulations. Thank you.
design as bookmakers and book lovers. We design all of our books in-house, the covers, the interiors, and we're thoughtful, we're quirky. So the fact that this was supposed to be 3 separate works, we use polygons, and we use imprints, and we use ways that publishers would differentiate their manuscripts as a way to simulate the collage aspect of the manuscript. So we get very meta with our design. Maybe you should have a stylistic agent going, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah.